Hello, guys, and welcome to Writer on Writer. So this is a third, fourth episode so far for this series, and it's pretty much just shooting the breeze about comics and just discussing candidly about the industry. And I am here with David. So if you want to introduce yourself to the crowd.
Hi, I'm David Pepose. You might know me from my work on Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel over at Action Lab. And I just launched a new Kickstarter this week called the OZ, which is what if the Hurt Locker and Mad Max took place in the Wizard of Oz. And so I'm really excited to be here, Kat, to chat with you about all this. And dish on some comics writing, have some fun.
Oh, for sure. And I guess for people just tuning in. So I've known David for 3 years. Since 2017, I've been working for Newsarama. So the first gig was
short. I guess it was that short.
Right? It's like kind of crazy.
Yeah, I feel like I've known you for much longer. But yeah, I guess you didn't. I guess you joined the team after I moved to California. Wow, that's. I would have said you were a 10-year person. So that speaks to your work ethic and how much you throw in. But yeah, we've known each other for quite some time. I feel like I've had the privilege of being your editor, and now that I've sort of ridden off into the sunset, suddenly I've sort of dove into the comics creating pool, and I think I just started in the deep end.
Oh, you definitely did. Well, first of all, we should talk. Well, I should give the link to the Kickstarter for anyone who wants to back it up.
Sure.
We will be sharing that link throughout the show, back up the Kickstarter. But you had an extremely successful start for this Kickstarter. Your first Kickstarter. Tell us what's your reaction? What was the preparation for that?
The reaction is just kind of like, what? That's kind of, I mean, I had talked with friends who had done Kickstarters. They had said, because you've never done a Kickstarter before, you should manage your expectations. You should, a bunch of my friends were saying, you should set it around 5,000. And I had a couple friends being like, maybe you could go a little higher. The two people who had told me that I could go higher, and I didn't believe them because I wanted to err on the side of caution. My friend Charlie Stickney from White Ash.
Charlie is amazing.
He's a mensch. I love him. I think he was saying you could do like 7 or 8. And my buddy Rylan Grant, who just wrapped up his Kickstarter for The Jump, he was the one saying shoot for the moon, go for 10. And so I compromised and I went for 6. And then we funded in 2 hours. Which is crazy. And I think for me, you come up with backup plans and then backup plans to the backup plans. But like, how could you possibly anticipate over 430% funded and climbing? That's like stepping out for a sandwich and winding up on the moon. Like you can't plan for that. And so you have to really kind of then figure all this stuff out on the fly. I've said I've worked in the direct market with Action Lab, and I feel like Kickstarter is like a different planet with its own laws of physics. And so learning that on the fly has been it's been the fun challenge of this campaign. As for how it happened, it was a combination of me trying to sort of do every single thing I could think of, and then us catching some really lucky breaks along the way. I think the big thing that really helped us out was, we launched our Kickstarter on the same day as Scott Snyder, who launched his Kickstarter for Nocturnal with Tony Daniel. They were doing a combination script book and art and art collection, and there were so many people who joined Kickstarter or were on Kickstarter because of Scott. That's what happens when you write a small independent book called Batman. And, that really helped us out in a big way because that's Kickstarter's model. Once you buy a book, they want to recommend other books to you. They want to keep you in that ecosystem. So I think we really, it was like capturing lightning in a bottle. We were there at just like the biggest boom time. We launched, I think about an hour after Scott. And So, there was that. There was, reaching out to press. I had reached out to a lot of press outlets in the preceding weeks before the Kickstarter. And thankfully, I had built up a lot of relationships with press over the years, thanks to my work on Spencer and Locke and Spencer and Locke 2 and going to the chapel. Having been in the comics journalism trenches, which you can relate to, it's always been easy for me to approach a comics journalist just to say, hey, I've read your work, I really enjoyed it, is there any way that I could give you some information about my book? And knowing what goes into a press release, and knowing, if somebody had sent me an email, what I would want to see. And it's one of those things, you can't do it overnight. I mean, I've done this over the course of years at this point, but it helped. I think it gave, there were a lot of people who were willing to take a chance on this book, knowing my track record, knowing who I am, that if it was, a random person off the street, they might not. I attribute a lot of the early press success to, we gave 3 exclusives to IGN, Sci-Fi, and CBR. And I don't think any of those sites would have given a random Kickstarter a chance. But I think it was the combination of what the concept was, and the fact that they all knew me, that I had worked with them before, and that they knew I wasn't going to half-ass it, that I would give them something that would be worth their time. It really paid off in a big way, and it kind of started a real snowball effect that we're still really enjoying 5 days later.
That's awesome. And yeah, and first of all, congratulations again. I think it's so amazing. And how are you feeling about the Kickstarter platform in general? Because I know that's such a wide, large question, but is it the future, right?
Yes, it is. It is the future. I mean, the thing is, I've been thinking about doing Kickstarter for a while. Because I'm friendly with Charlie and Ryland, who both live in Los Angeles. We've done a bunch of signings together. We've tabled together. People like Russell Nahelty, who's got a laundry list of Kickstarter projects. Pat Shand, who's had a lot of success with Destiny New York. I'm friends with him through our mutual friend, Troy Brownfield. So all the LA crew, and there's so many more LA comics Kickstarter people who I haven't even named. But they all sort of served as my brain trust when I was putting this together. And that's because they've all been press ganging me since October, saying, when are you going to do a Kickstarter? And so I said, okay, I guess I'll do a Kickstarter. And I thought of it as a hypothetical. And at the same time, I was working on the OZ. We had 2 issues in the can already done. I had written the whole series. And you might know, the comics publishing pipeline is chaotic in the best of times. And the last few months have not been the best of times. It's been
don't pitch.
It's one of those things. It's hard to pitch, and the acquisitions are narrowing, and on top of that, the release schedule is staggering. So, with that in mind, I had talked with a bunch of publishers about the OZ, and we had a lot of interest, but people would drag their heels. And then COVID hit, and then suddenly conversations that were really moving, no conversations were moving. Or I would be in a conversation, and then we'd restart the conversation 3 months later, and it felt like Groundhog Day. So at that moment, it kind of hit me that I was like, well, I've been wanting to do a Kickstarter. I've been wanting to do outreach to that demographic that primarily buys their books on Kickstarter versus a comic shop or a con or Amazon. Why don't I just do that with the OZ? Why don't I just solve one problem with another and stop asking for permission? And that was a big game changer for me. That made me realize oh, okay, I could really kind of take my own career into my own hands. And so that was very empowering for me as a creator. And pretty much the moment I decided I was going to do it, I kind of went full on into work mode. I started approaching our variant artists like Mon House and Rio Burton and Kenneth Wagnon. And we were really off to the races. And I think that the thing that I really like most about Kickstarter is, and here I'm going to do a little cinematic turn. All right.
That was beautiful work of art.
Thank you. It was very Michael Bay. So, you know, the thing I like about Kickstarter, it's very different. It's a different animal than the direct market. You know, I like to think of Scott dropping his book, you know, as an example. If Scott decided to pull Beyonce and drop Nocturnal in a comic shop on the day that I had a new release, it would be like a kill shot. You know, like retailers only have a certain amount of shelf space. They only have a certain amount of bandwidth, a certain amount of attention. It drives those feelings of scarcity, which I don't think are necessarily healthy, but like I understand kind of where it comes from when there's limited shelf space and limited money and limited attention. Kickstarter, on the other hand, it's a rising tide floats all boats. And I feel like the way that we've had the general comics industry has really come together to kind of lift this book up has been, I felt incredibly grateful for it. You know, the fact that people like Scott Snyder, Gail Simone, Mark Russell, you know, Kevin Eastman, they all have like shouted out our book. Jim Zub just did today. Super kind of him. Becky Cloonan. You know, a lot of this has been, you know, like it didn't come out of nowhere. I would reach out and say, hey, would you mind giving us a share or a retweet? And granted, you know, because I worked at Newsarama for 12 years. And so I had a lot of at least acquaintanceships with people, you know, like I tabled next to Becky Cloonan at Boston Fan Expo a few years ago, and Gail Simone. And like I've met Tom Taylor at cons, or Jim Zub. I used to post his columns at Blog at Newsarama way back in the day. Those are the sorts of things, you know, my younger siblings are in their mid-20s and they always say, oh, like, you know, why aren't things happening? And you got to look at it at the long game. This is like you're building relationships over like a decade. That's when they start to like, that's when you're able to start knocking on doors and people are able to start doing things. So it's just a matter of being out there, getting yourself out there, getting to meet people, sort of becoming a member of your peer group and of your class. And not that I think that like Gail Simone or Scott Snyder are my peers or like my class, you know, obviously they're way above where I'm at. But the fact that I've been in their orbit long enough, it wasn't a cold call. It was, oh, I know you, I've met you, or I at least know you by reputation. And then by virtue of having, I think, a project that we strove to make it the highest professional quality, that I think also really helped. I mean, it's, you know, it doesn't matter how many pros, you know, if you pitch something that like isn't ready for prime time, they're not going to want to promote it because of course it makes them look weird too. But if you've got something that's like that looks that could go toe to toe with an Image book or a Vault book, or, you know, or a Boom book. And I really strongly think that the artwork in the OZ does. People will they like to promote something that they think is cool, and so yeah, I feel like Kickstarter promotes that sort of thing. It's a very collaborative ecosystem, and that's part of their business model. You know, if you buy something on Kickstarter, they want to keep you in Kickstarter, and they want to keep recommending things to you on Kickstarter because Kickstarter makes money doing that. And I, you know, that means that Kickstarter, I think Kickstarter's really pulled its own weight in terms of the way that it's promoted us. You know, I get updates from other Kickstarters and I see little ads for the OZ at the bottom, or I see Zach Quaintance's book next door, or I see Project Starless Daydream from Frankie White, or Scott's book Nocturnal. I mean, they are doing really well in terms of sort of getting our work out there. So yeah, I mean, you know, I think that Kickstarter will be the end all be all? No. And I do worry that, especially with people seeing Scott having joined, that there's going to be a flood of nervous big two creators who the lines have been shrinking. And also like I think there's a level of atrophy that can happen sometimes when you've stayed too long in the big two and haven't flexed your muscles doing something great around. and so, I do worry that we might see an influx of like people kind of just throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. But I feel like Kickstarter's been such a vibrant hotbed of, new and interesting voices that I think that equilibrium will sort itself out. I'm hoping that it will not turn into the direct market part 2. But I think, in the best case scenario, you got to do a bunch of things, Kickstarter for sure, crowdfunding, do it working in the direct market. Sometimes that's having a book in Kickstarter that then has a second life in the direct market. Doing things online, webcomics, webtoons, Gumroad, doing things outside of the direct market. Scholastic and Random House and all these other traditional publishers are getting more and more graphic novels. And I really feel that there's going to be a shift for more adult graphic novels within the next few years, because these publishers are going to realize that they've been leaving money on the table all this time. So I think that's the future. The future is sort of taking these kind of 4 different, demographics and doing conventions, of course. But
once
taking
we're
those
allowed to again.
Once we're allowed. Once we're allowed. But those 4 kind of main demographics plus cons, I think that is going to be kind of what creators are going to need to do in order to future-proof themselves if they want to stay in the industry for the long haul.
I definitely agree with that. And I think delving into other genres, something that we've seen in Kickstarter a lot. First of all, we've been seeing a lot of anthologies, which is really cool, but from diverse voices and from one that I just backed up was the Black Noir book, where it's all Black creators. And
I know the editors of that book.
Really great concept.
Yeah. I think anthologies are really important for the comics ecosystem. I kind of bypassed it a little bit, but I did a DIY kind of version of this, where when I first started writing, I was terrible at it. Real bad. But I had interviewed Greg Pak a few months prior to when I started, and he had told me that one of the biggest epiphanies that he had was to give himself permission to be bad when he first started out, to just put in the reps and get it done and learn structure and improve and learn from your mistakes. So I, rather than joining an anthology, which I think a lot of people do to sort of get their reps in and to get some published work out, I wrote a short comic script a day for 90 days. And once that was done, I was a lot better at it. But I also wrote some like terrible stinkers that are never going to see the light of day, but it made me less precious about it all. And made me a little bit more flexible with my ideas, and knowing that, hey, if an idea doesn't work today, there will be another idea tomorrow. And sometimes there's something to be said for kind of embracing your crappy ideas, the ideas that you don't think could work, that you don't think have any place in the industry. So I think, anthologies are really important. I think that's where a lot of people cut their teeth. Even you look at the big 2, and not to say that, Marvel and DC are the end all be all goal, or should be for everybody, but you see that's how they operate. You've sort of worked your way in the trenches in the indies long enough, and then they start offering you a couple of shorts. I'll tell you for sure, like, I'm working on some anthology stories right now, of varying lengths, and that's in part because I want to show that I have writing samples of various sizes. So if a licensed company comes knocking and says, hey, look, we don't have like a full story, but we have like, we have an 8-pager, or we have a 1-shot, or we have a 4-pager, or a 2-pager, or a 1-pager, I can say, hey, I have that. Do you want to see a sample? So but I also think it's a great way for creators to signal boost each other. Like you said, for the noir anthology, it's they had it was like 30 creators or something like that, maybe even more.
There was a ton. I remember I did my top 10 Kickstarter video, and I couldn't even tag them all because it's like, oh man, it's like there's a lot of creators.
Many. And so yeah, I think that's good. Russell Nahelty has had a lot of success doing that as well with his Cthulhu's Hard to Spell anthology, which if I have any recent regrets of comics, it was not, I don't know Cthulhu very well, and Russell had invited me to do the Kickstarter, and I was just so buried with Spencer and Locke 2 and going to the chapel, and I couldn't bone up on Cthulhu in time, and I do regret not doing that Kickstarter because I think that would have been really fun. But yeah, it's it's a great way also to build that class that we were talking about, to find your peers. If you do an anthology, they're your peers. And so you're able to kind of reach out to these people and figure out exactly, figure out exactly what, who your peers are and who you can trust and who you can use, who can, lift you up and you can lift up in return.
Oh, for sure. And that's something so amazing about Kickstarter as well, is as you look at throughout the months, and especially if you look through the catalog, you might see some of the similar creators, and you definitely should be friends. Yeah. Like you were mentioning Pat, you're mentioning Charlie, and it's such a small world because I know both of them very well as well. And it's interesting to see how things kind of cross, and it's a small world. I mean, comics in general is a small world, but we also have like different sectors in comics. But it's interesting.
Yeah, because it's like, look, there, sometimes you meet people at cons, but like you said, cons, RIP. Same thing with store signings. If you're a comics creator, particularly in a city like New York or LA, you meet a lot of people at events, at industry events. And, Twitter is another thing. I mean, there's so many people that just, they befriend each other on Twitter. And that, I find a lot of artists like that. Like I worked on a really fun anthology with Chris Sheehan, who's now doing the autumnal over at Vault. And, it was just because like we just kind of started chatting it up on Twitter, and I really dug his work, and I got invited to do this anthology, and I was like, hey buddy, would you mind doing, I think it was a 2-pager or something, very short. And he killed it. Oh, he just crushed it. It's amazing. The thing is if I had just like hit him up cold, it wouldn't have worked out. He would have probably just said, I don't know you and I'm busy. But if you're able to develop those relationships, and I think anthologies are great because you're able to I think anthologies are great. I think variant covers are great. It's ways to sort of get to know people in as low of an impact and, least amount of investment as possible, both for you financially and for them in terms of timing. There are a lot of people who have done really awesome variant covers for me who I've kept up very long relationships with. Mon House, for example, is kind of the best example. I found him in a panic. I was looking for somebody to do a variant cover for Spencer and Locke, the first issue, because my publisher had told me with like only a few weeks notice, oh, how many variants do you have? And I said, I can do variants. I'm allowed. I've been waiting for an answer on this. And so Mon was able to turn around a cover relatively quickly, and it's a really eye-catching cover. And I've worked with him on variant covers on literally every project since. He's done variants on both volumes of Spencer and Locke, Going to the Chapel. He's done variants now on the OZ. I keep saying like why he doesn't have an Eisner for best covers just is beyond me. And that all started with one variant. So I think Kickstarter has really reinforced this for me, because I think by virtue of being in the direct market where there is a feeling of competition, you got to feel like, if you're not the hot indie thing, somebody else is, and that means you can't be. And I think Kickstarter has really been a good antidote to that, where it's been just a reminder that like, oh no, like we're in this together. And as a creator, the best way that you survive is by lifting other people up, and knowing that when you need them, they can be counted on to do the same. But yeah, it's definitely been a learning curve. I think if there's one thing, I feel like I learned a lot as a reviewer, and it was a huge help for me, and I wouldn't be the writer I am today without it. So I don't regret it one instant. But I do think one unintended thing, and it was part of the reason why I wrote off into the sunset. I felt like I had put myself at a distance, that I subconsciously sort of gave myself distance from other creators, even ones that I was friendly with, because I didn't want people, I always wanted to be a person of integrity with my reviews. I wanted my word to mean something. I didn't want creators to think that I could be in their pocket or that I could be bought. And at the same time, that meant that when my books were coming out, I really felt like I was going it alone. Some people would be nice and retweet, but like I would never feel confident asking, because that would, I would owe them. And now that I am no longer a reviewer, I sort of, that block was gone, because now I was just like, oh, I can reach out to these people who have respected my work in the past, both as a critic and as a creator. And there's no fear now of, oh man, is this going to be considered inappropriate? Is this gonna, either inadvertently make somebody mad down the line, or is this going to make my work somehow have less integrity? Now, by being sort of jumping with both feet in, it's given me a bandwidth and a focus that I don't think I had before. So as bittersweet as it was to leave, and I is the longest relationship I ever had, I feel like in retrospect, I had hit the ceiling that I could have hit wearing both hats. And this week, I think, has been proof that, by focusing 100% on it, it's really paid dividends in a big way.
And, I'm sure a lot of people watching now might be a new writer or a new creator. I feel like a lot of times people, and we kind of already did discuss this, we discuss from a creative point of view of like, oh, this is what you do, like do this and that. But from a business point of view, where do you think like a writer, like who probably hasn't made their name, should focus on? Is it the Kickstarter? Is it to pitch? Is it whatever?
Ultimately, you should be trying a bunch of things because you don't know what's going to stick. The thing that I always say for writers is start small. And to be honest, this might be considered heresy because there are a lot of people who swear by the anthology model. For me, my belief is I would rather have less output but have been ready for prime time when I showed up than learning publicly, on the job. It's not to say you can't learn on the job. It just, I like I said, I wrote 90 short stories and none of them I would consider like ready for public consumption. So I do think there are ways to put in your reps that I think it's being creatively patient with yourself and putting that creative ego away, which we all have. Of course, we want to see our name and, getting praised. We want to get great reviews, of course, that's all great. I love that. But I think when you're just starting out, you got to be a little zen about it. And you just got to say, okay, how do I feel good about my work? How do I put out something that, like, if I read this, just like if I bought this comic off the shelf, I would have genuinely enjoyed it. That's always the question that I ask myself and my team is, if I didn't create this, if I wasn't the ringleader, if I wasn't the writer, what would I have said as a reviewer? And if the answer is I would have dinged them, then I try to fix it. So I think starting small, I think is really important. I think you can get a lot more learning done by writing shorts, writing a bunch of shorts than writing one long project. You can grow into that. Nobody tells you to, get a pair of shoes and run a marathon. You build to it. You get your reps in, you build those muscle groups. If you try to jump in immediately, you're going to burn yourself out. And then you won't even have learned anything from it other than you bit off way more than you can chew. I think once you're ready to get your work out, it's tough. I think, especially when you're starting out, and maybe this will change post-COVID, but I think, when you're starting out and you get a collaborator on board, there is that sort of feeling, oh yeah, let's go to a publisher and, we'll get legit. And, so I do think you shouldn't discount it. There are good things that can happen with publishers, even if the finances aren't necessarily as good as Kickstarter.
Yeah, the finances are always better on Kickstarter. Just to let everyone know on that side, you're gonna recoup your money a little bit, which maybe honestly, that's another side of the question I kind of have is that because I feel like a lot of people that don't create comics don't know that, like, especially for indie comics, writers pay out of pocket. Like writers pay for it. And how do you feel about that system in general?
It's one of those things that I get it, because like at the end of the day, like the worst injury you and I are ever going to get as writers is like falling off the couch weird. Whereas like, I experienced this with Jorge Santiago Jr., my artist and co-creator and Spencer and Locke, is that, it's physical labor for them. And, if you push them too hard, they blow out their wrist. It's a career ending injury. So I understand in the sense that, like, artists are spending so much more time and literal physical labor than we are. As writers, we can be a little more promiscuous and we can be working on multiple projects at once. Whereas, an artist, they really got to work on one thing at a time. So I understand that. I mean, I do feel like, of course, it's a heavy financial burden, which sucks. And I do think that, like, the writers being sort of the ones that it's the highest risk and highest reward, and I think there are ways to negotiate your contracts with your collaborators that, okay, like if they're getting paid up front, then you're getting the back end side and you're getting the lion's share of the multimedia side. That said, if you find an artist who's willing to go splitsies with you, that of course is you're both assuming the risk. And it's really kind of whatever arrangement that you can come up with your collaborator. That's part of what makes them the right collaborators, that you can make a deal with them that you can live with and that you can sleep at night and that they can live with and they can sleep at night. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's one of many things that kind of go into that calculus of almost like, the dating scene of finding a collaborator. But yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize, like, if it's all out of the artist's pocket, all out of the writer's pocket, which at this point, all but one series I've ever written has I've bankrolled significant portions, if not all of it. And it's tough. It certainly is not for the faint of heart. And it's definitely something that people should recognize. I mean, I was really lucky that, like, I had a lot of savings. I worked in corporate for a long time. My first 2 years in California, I lived with family. Like, it helped save money for more comics. That's part of the reason I did conventions like a crazy person, is that every time that I would do a convention, I would sell enough books to make rent. So I feel like, the economics of comics are a little wild. Kickstarter is certainly helpful in that regard. But the other thing you kind of have to ask yourself is, like, what's the definition of success for you? If it's the financial side, then Kickstarter is absolutely the way to do it. If there's certain intangibles that you want, if it's being able to sort of rise the ranks of publishers, for example, it's not to say you can't, just kind of walk into like a mid-tier or a high-tier publisher based on the strength of your Kickstarter. But it's got to be a really strong Kickstarter to do that.
You gotta be Charlie, I would say, right? You gotta be a Charlie.
You gotta be Charlie. You gotta
be Russell.
Yeah, and it's a different ecosystem, but I think if you can kind of mix them together, that makes it a little more robust, I think. The fact that I had 3 direct market books under my belt, I think, helped significantly with the Kickstarter, because people already knew who I was, and I was able to leverage a lot of press based on my direct market books. So then when I was hitting them up about a Kickstarter, it was not just, oh, it's a random Kickstarter, but it was somebody who was a known quantity in the direct market. They were able to take a little more of a chance on me. Yeah, I think going back to your initial question, I think it's just starting small. It's being able to do repetition is way more important than being able to like dash off your magnum opus like immediately. I mean, most people probably know this, but in case your viewers don't know this, like nobody wants your 60 issue Y the Last Man. Nobody wants that. Nobody even wants that if you're like Brian K. Vaughan right now, you know, like he, you know, maybe him with Saga, but it's just, you know,
Paper Girls ended at 30, so that's proof pudding too, and that could have been juiced to 100 issues probably.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, you know, the direct market is not what it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And so, you know, those sort of big epics, you know, you got to keep that to yourself or go to Webtoons, you know, like it's not something the direct market's going to be able to sustain. To be honest, I don't even think it's something Kickstarter would be able to sustain. And so starting small, and learning and growing from that, then you can start to build up to, you know, I mean, some people say build up to one shots. I don't think that's necessarily a great use of your time.
Maybe, right? Do a mini series at least.
You know, do a mini. Yeah, exactly. Just show that, like, okay, like this is something that you could show to a publisher, and you know, or something that you could put on Kickstarter. You know, I mean, it's not to say like the OZ works because, well, first off, it's, you know, it's part 1 and it's double sized, and you know, readers know that like we're going to have a second Kickstarter for part 2 and a third Kickstarter for part 3. Like a one shot, I mean, maybe if it's like a really good one shot, I mean, you know, like, but I don't think starting out is the way to do it. Like at that point, just do a mini. Like I'm doing a one shot now, but it's in conjunction as like, it's starting off as an anthology story as a one shot. So I'm just like, okay, it exists. You know, it's in the one shot. I have 20 pages. You know, whether or not I choose to pick it up again later, I don't know, but it's self-contained enough that I feel okay with it. I'm also not pinning my career on that. You know, that's just kind of like a side thing. It's something that's a little more YA friendly. So when I go to conventions, when conventions come back, I will have something to sell to the children. But yeah, I think start small. And then you can do like a mini, like a 4-issue mini. Some people swear by 3. It's not for me. I say 4 is kind of a good sweet spot. That's what a lot of publishers really like. And then, yeah, go from there. But you know this, and I know this, that rejection is going to be part of it. And some of it's not going to be based, you know, some of it'll be based on like just not being ready for prime time. And that sucks. You know, that hurts. You just kind of got to, you know, up your game. You know, you reassess, you recalibrate, you see how can I improve. Sometimes it's just, you know, the chips don't fall your way. I mean, like the OZ, for example, when I first came up with it, I was talking with a publisher about it. We didn't have Ruben or Whitney or DC attached. And we went all the way up the flagpole with it. The editor I worked with really liked it. And then we went up against another fantasy book that was by a much bigger name and was in a similar kind of tonal wheelhouse. And so it made sense that they went with the other guy instead of me. You know, I only had one book under my belt. This guy had more books under his belt. And the editor told me, listen, I want you to know this wasn't about you. This was just the chips didn't fall your way. I think this is really good and you should still pursue it. It was something that I wouldn't expect a lot of editors to do. I don't think many of them do. I think they're so usually swamped that they don't have time for the niceties. But it was a small moment of kindness that really made the difference for me, where I said, okay, somebody believed in this, and I had fallen in love with the story having developed it. And that's when I kind of took matters into my own hands and said, okay, I'm going to find a creative team and I'm just going to put this out myself.
And you never, I mean, I think for anything, probability is always on your side, right? Like you fail once, it's just like, it's got to hit at some point.
Eventually, yeah. It's like if you put in the numbers, you know, listen, I've survived the New York dating scene. And it's like, you get a lot of no's and you just need the right yes. And that's the same thing for comics. You just got to develop a thick skin. Every time that I got a rejection, it just made me push it harder. I distinctly remember an EIC from a big name publisher looking at Spencer and Locke and saying it's the best thing I'll never publish. which I wear as a badge of honor. That's hilarious. I love that. Going to the chapel, I pitched that all over town, and so many people were like, we love it and we don't know how to sell it.
Especially because it's like a romance, because
yeah,
it's like I wish romance comics were more in the direct market, which is interesting to see in Kickstarter. It's the hot thing, right?
Sure.
And the webtoons, oh my god, webtoons, that's all it is.
That's exactly, it's sometimes the direct market speaks in its own language and thinks in its own language, and sometimes that doesn't necessarily like map to reality. Sometimes it's just you got to get it done, and then everybody realizes it was possible. I think my career is kind of proof positive of that. And so yeah, knock on doors at publishers. If it's that you're not ready for prime time, that's one thing. Then you go back and you work in your craft and you get ready for prime time. If it's just a matter of they don't have the vision or they don't get it, then you got to make your own opportunities. And I feel like Kickstarter in that sense is really helpful. It's a gamble, and you're going to learn real quick if you are ready for prime time. But I think it's a really important place for people who wouldn't necessarily, not for any fault or lack of talent on their own, but just the pipeline for publishers is fairly conservative. And Kickstarter, it's anything goes. And so I think it's a very important and vital place for the comics industry at large.
And you never know how many numbers you're going to get too. Because we could talk about the numbers of the direct market and how much a big DC or Marvel book is selling. But we go back to like webtoons, their biggest thing is getting millions of views every chapter, which is like mind blowing. All comic people are asking, how do you cross the wires? And I think Kickstarter actually is that place. It is that place where we're seeing traditional comics and the webtoon style comics crossing wires.
Yes.
Can you make the audiences of both love comics? And that's why I think we're in a special place right now.
Yeah, I think you're dead on with it. I mean, because that's always been my goal. It's you got the chocolate of the direct market and you got the peanut butter of the Kickstarter readers, and it's like, how do you introduce them? How do you get them together? So this is something I learned from Ryland Grant, but we're in, every single tier of my Kickstarter has the first issue PDFs of Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel, just because it's like, if you are one of the 700 people who have backed this book and you don't know who I am, you're gonna know. You're gonna find out who I am, and maybe you'll like these books, and then maybe you'll order them. You'll order them on Itch Comic Shop or Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or maybe you'll get them from, my backer kit or something like that. So yeah, I mean, it's always about just, how do you invite more people to the table, and how do you build that wider consensus, and how do you start introducing that consensus to each other? That's something that I think fills me with a lot of hope at a time when the industry does not always seem the most hopeful.
Oh, for sure. This has been doomsday in a lot of ways, but Kickstarter has been like that spotlight. Even if you like during a time when no one was able to read comics, those 2 months where nothing was being published. I thought Kickstarter was such a great place. We saw a lot of Kickstarters launching during that time. Like, oh, cool! I could still buy comics.
Well, I think also that COVID at least really illustrated to me that a lot of the things that we had established as gospel in the direct market, that these things were just as fallible as any other institution. The fact that Diamond, not only that Diamond shut down, but Diamond basically shut down the whole industry. And that there were some publishers who were like, there were some shops that shut down, and there were some shops that said, we still want to stick it out. And that was a tough minefield for a lot of creators. I talked with one person I knew who, his publisher was still putting out their book. And they were telling me, I was talking with retailers, and some were really happy, and some were saying, why are you trying to push more product on me? I'm trying to pay my rent. So that's a real difficult, catch 22. And I realized very quickly, like, oh, hey, I thought I learned a lot. I knew a lot about comics, and I didn't. I knew how to write a comic, and I knew the project management side. I knew the publicity, but I didn't know anything about printing comics. I didn't know what a reputable comics printer would look like. I didn't know anything about paperweight or paper stock. I didn't know anything about production or mailing costs or shipping. And
that's always fun stuff to learn as you're doing the Kickstarter. Like,
it's it's empowering, because now if you have an idea and you feel like you're ready for it, you don't have to wait for permission. You can just go to Kickstarter. And I feel like that was the missing piece of the puzzle that I didn't have before. And I think it's very much empowered me as a creator. You know, I still want to work with traditional publishers. I still have books scheduled to come out with traditional publishers, you know, between Spencer and Locke 3 over at Action Lab, and Grand Theft Astro over at Top Cow, and another book that I have in the works that hasn't been announced yet. So like, I still see myself working with traditional publishers, but not having to wait is really empowering, because, you know, a lot of publishers, you know, they're starting to realize that, oh, Kickstarter, you know, it's a vocal crowd, but it's not direct market numbers. So even if, you know, 700 people read the OZ, you know, if, for example, down the line, if a publisher decided they wanted to pick us up, you know, most new indie books, if you market them high enough, can get anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 people. And, you know, that 700 is not going to be like a huge drop in the bucket. If anything, our numbers, if we ever got a second life in the direct market, would only be a good thing, because the people would say, oh, there's a market here, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, I do feel, though, like COVID really it was the kick I needed to take my career and my destiny in my own hands. And I think that's something that all creators are going to have to think about. I think it's going to make them everybody's going to have to up their game. And, you know, it's long deserved. It's long deserved and long needed.
And I think understanding, because again, I'm sure a lot of people watching this want to be a writer, going into writing, and to learn that writing is not just writing. It is so much more than that. It's exactly what you're saying. I think you also, I saw the update, you use comic impressions as well, right? For printing?
Yeah. Yes. And yeah, you know, Charlie recommended them. I'd heard great things about them. You know, cynically, also, they are in Florida, which is going to be the last state to close down if anything happens with the pandemic. So yeah, I you know, and they've been great. You know, Rich Boyle over there has been really wonderful. I've been working with him. So shout out to you, Rich. But yeah, it's these are all things that 2 months ago I had no idea about.
Right, and you have to do that research and understand, like, oh, it does matter what printer I use. You know, also you're being your own PR person too, right? You're going to these, you're going to press, you're going to all these things, and you're writing all the things you need to. So I think understanding that you're your own social media person, you're your own. Yes, you're writing the book, but so much more than that. Also understanding, oh, how do I mail this thing? How much money is it to mail this thing? It's so many things that you have to learn, but it's so, you know.
I had to run the math. That was actually the hardest part of the campaign. I had the campaign totally ready for about a week, and I was just sitting there figuring out the shipping of it all. How was I going to ship things? You know, a Gemini mailer, for example, if I'm only sending one book, it's cheaper to send it first class. But if I'm sending 4 issues, it's cheaper to send it priority mail in a priority mail legal envelope. But if I'm sending 4 single issues and 3 trades, which are going to fit in 2 Gemini mailers, then I got to go to the medium side loader priority mail box. And, you know, it's like, it's there's a lot of things. And then it's like, if I'm shipping it to Canada, okay, once I start doing the boxes, then it's actually cheaper for me to use UPS. Same thing for England. You know, once you hit a certain point, like, you know, priority mail only really works domestically. And, you know, there's some people who swear meanwhile by media mail. You know, it's a little bit of a roll of the dice, because technically they're not supposed to send comics, but, like, you know, they might not.
Your post office is.
Exactly.
Try it out.
It's like, you know, if somebody doesn't check, then you're fine. So it's really figuring out, that's a little risk, a little reward, you're kind of figuring all that out. And especially right now with everything going on with the post office, but these are all things.
It's been a month since and it's just on the conveyor belt right now. I'm like, I don't know what to do. Just message me like, I'm sorry.
Yeah, hopefully, backers are understanding of it at this point. But, that's something that when you work with a publisher, at first it's great. It's legitimizing and you don't have to worry about the other stuff. But I think, being able to go back to our roots a little bit and be a little more DIY, I think that's something we all need to learn, even if it sucks and you hate it, or even if you're not particularly good at it, knowing that you've done it, it can only help you as a creator. I think this is the best thing I've done for myself in my career for a very long time. And I think it will pay dividends down the road, whether that's with future Kickstarter projects, with the second and third issue of the OZ, as well as direct market projects. I think people are seeing this campaign and noticing this campaign and saying, okay, if he can get this kind of success on his own, what could he do with us? So I don't know.
And what's that? We were talking about this before the show started, but what's the emotional roller coaster been like? I mean, as you started it this week, I know you might have another emotion by next week or the end of the Kickstarter. And I love when you came in, you're just like, I'm going to have to take a week off after this. Cause for sure, I think unless you do a Kickstarter, you don't understand, because you're also putting yourself out there, right?
Yeah. It's very different than a direct market launch. I mean, usually the direct market launch, it's a little more staggered. You're putting yourself out there during pre-orders, and then you get a little bit of time to wait. And then it's leading into your release date, you start to ramp things up, but that's the second wave, whereas Kickstarter, it's all the same wave. You have one wave, you have one shot, you have 30 days. And the speed of it all, and we talked a little bit about this before, is that, you make the backup plans, but you can't account for 400% success. And so the speed of it really took me off guard, and the intensity of it all. By the time September hits, I'll have done something like 45 podcasts for this book. I feel like I could sleep for a week. There's one set of interview questions that I still owe that I just have not gotten 2 hours to sit and do it. And I feel awful. It will happen tonight, but yeah, it's just, you got to be on, especially those first 2 days. The first 2 days are most important, in case you don't know. And so,
your Kickstarter, the way the algorithm works for Kickstarter, those first 2 days.
So if you do really well in your first 2 days, Kickstarter will promote that a little heavier. And so it's, you want to push those hard, but then also, I've been told you get a dip, after the first couple of days. And, I mean, we've certainly, our growth has been more incremental since our first 2-day boost. It's still building steadily. But I've been thinking of ways to okay, how do we keep things going? Every day we found something interesting to kind of hinge the day on. The first day we were funded, 100, we were funded in 2 hours. And then the second day we made 300% funding. And the third day, we had made, I think 600 followers. And then by today we had crossed 400%. And, so every day we're trying to find something new. Next week, we're going to be doing an interesting twist on the stretch goals that I think will drive some more engagement. But yeah, it's just, you just got to put yourself out there as much as possible. It's hitting up every podcast. It's hitting up every news outlet. It's hitting up every creator, and actually no, don't cold call them. That is not going to end well for you. But I think leaving no stone unturned and just trying to do stuff every day. Posting on social media is important. I've been on my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram nonstop. I should have done a little bit more with my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the book accounts, but there's only one of me. Yeah, I think it's exhausting though, and I feel like I've run a good marathon. I'm super happy to have run it. I'm not complaining, but it is a sort of intensity that even if you've done a direct market launch, this is a very different animal. And that's the thing that really surprised me out of all this. Even my friends who told me, oh, this is going to be intense, just be ready, they did not sell it hard enough. Yes. How do I sleep? Not very well. Go Killer Ben. I've been waking up at 5 every morning. I've been waking up at 5 a.m. every morning since the Kickstarter started.
Oh God.
So yeah, it's not good. I should answer your other question, Ben. What made you want to write comics? I'm a 3rd generation comics reader. Loved them all my life. I feel like they're kind of like morality plays. At least the superhero genre. I think the indie genre, meanwhile, is like a hotbed of really cool concepts. It's sort of the most experimental and innovative storytelling out there. I love the constraints of it all. The fact that you can tell a comic story, it's constrained by your page count, which is constrained by how many panels you can fit in those pages, which is constrained by how many word balloons you can fit on there without blocking all the art, which is constrained by how many words can you fit in those word balloons before it turns into blocks of text. For me, I see it like a Rubik's Cube. You're solving it, and it's interesting, just the act of solving it. It's also a little bit more like the Wild West compared to other forms of entertainment. Screenwriting and the like, they really want to pigeonhole you, because in Hollywood there's so many more people competing that you really need to make you need to figure out your niche very quickly. Comics, I can jump from comic strip homicide to Elvis themed bank robbers to faster than light heists to post-apocalyptic Oz, and nobody bats an eyelash. I get bored and restless really easily. And so comics are kind of my way to keep stretching different muscle groups and keep playing with different genres, in a way that I think there's a lot less limitation, because at the end of the day, all you need to do, you don't need anybody's permission. You just do it. And I think it's in a way that requires a lot less cost and infrastructure than, say, filmmaking, or possibly even playwriting. It's really, if you want to make a comic, at the end of the day, you yourself with a pen and a paper, you can make your own comic, and it doesn't cost anything. And I think that's just a really cool art form to explore.
For sure. It's such a interesting beast. And going back to how do you sleep? 5 a.m. That's crazy. Is it because you want to get all the work done, or is it just you can't sleep?
I can't sleep. It's when you're on, there's just that energy. And so, yeah, it's like, then I find myself waking up at 5 and 5:30, and first, I tell myself, I just want to go back to bed. The sun's not out yet. And I'm like, but I want to check my numbers. And that sort of gets the ball rolling. Then I'm like, I better check my email. I better check my social. All right. It's not a pace I can sustain forever. I'm hoping maybe this weekend I'll actually get a little bit of sleep, but yeah, it's just, at the same time, I think that's the thing about creator-owned comics, especially being the writer of a creator-owned comic, is nobody's going to love your baby the way you love your baby. And so, you got to leave it all out in the field. And so I don't mind a little lost sleep if it means that, my team gets the spotlight that they deserve, and, that the book gets funded, that we bring more people to the table. This is sort of an investment I'm making in my future. And yeah, it's like my grandfather always used to say, that nothing worth doing comes easy. And I think comics certainly represents that in a nutshell. And I think Kickstarter as well. What keeps me creatively going for new comics?
Especially during COVID.
Yeah, actually, for me, this is a little weird and counterintuitive. I used to do a lot of conventions. I had 16 scheduled for the year. I only got to do 2. COVID actually kind of gave me a little more bandwidth and a little more focus. I will say, the one thing about Diamond shutting down is it kind of gave me a little bit of freedom to create and kind of chisel through my backlog. I wasn't feeling like, oh man, other people are putting stuff out, I got to put stuff out. It was just like, nobody's doing anything, so I might as well just catch up. But what keeps me going creatively, besides fear and anxiety, and
that makes me not be creative. I'm just
and guilt. Why am I not working? No, what keeps me going it's just trying new things. Every time I write a book, my first book, Spencer and Locke, was a bucket list book. It was, if I never get to write another comic again, I want to make sure that I get these things in it. We had a car chase, and we had sci-fi, and we had dinosaurs, and we had mental illness, exploring that. These are all things I wanted to do if I only got one comic. Thankfully I got more, and I realized after I wrote that book, your bucket list never ends. You just keep finding more things. So the first volume of Spencer and Locke was a pretty tight, intimate cast. And so I said to myself, all right, well, I want a big cast in the next book. And so Going to the Chapel had 16 speaking roles in one location. I had said for Spencer and Locke, as much as I love my internal narrative captions, I was like, well, that could be a crutch. So the next book I wrote, I didn't have any internal narrative captions. Just by, I thought the book was, it was dark. So I wanted the next thing I wrote to be kind of light on its feet. Every book that you write, sometimes it's a reaction to the thing you just wrote. Cause it's also it's hard, anybody who says that writing comes super easy to them, I think they're a liar. It's exercise. It's, mental exercise. It's draining, and it's hard work. And so sometimes when you've spent 6 issues writing something, you're like, I've just written 6 issues of sci-fi. I don't want to write any sci-fi for a while. Let me do some fantasy. I've been desperately wanting to do a natural disaster book for the longest time, finding a cool twist on that. Or a time travel book. I Grand Theft Astro has some elements of time travel in it, but I wanted to do a full on time travel book, and I've got an idea that I'm going to start pursuing. So that's kind of what keeps me going, is if I have an idea that I fall in love with long enough to keep remembering it, I want to get to that, and I want to explore those characters. In a way, after I introduce them, they do feel like my kids a little bit. I feel genuine affection for Spencer and Locke's characters, and I feel genuine affection for Emily, Tom, and Jesse from Going to the Chapel, and I feel genuine feeling for Dorothy in the OZ, or the Tin Soldier, or the rest of her makeshift army of 4. You created them, you gave them voices, you gave them life. And, it's like my parents always used to say with me and my siblings. They had me, and they really liked me, and so they wanted to have more. And so they had more kids. Your heart winds up sort of, it grows to accommodate all these characters. And, maybe there are some people who see it as a more workman-like job. If my opinion is, then you don't have the right emotional engagement. I think if you are expecting somebody to be invested in your characters and to spend their hard-earned money on your story, then you need to put in the work to make sure that there's some actual emotional investment to these characters.
And, obviously a big part of doing Kickstarter, and we talked about this, is being on social media. And there's some creators, some people are just like, oh my God, I can't, because it really is. It's sometimes heavy to be on social media all the time. So how do you feel about, spending the whole day being on social media, pushing mentally, how's that? Looking at the page, because I'm sure, I know that's hard.
Yes. Zach Quaintance, who has a Kickstarter up called Next Door, he was telling me, he's like, it's going to be addictive. You're going to be checking your dashboard all the time. And I was just keep
it up at this point, right?
Yeah, I keep it up. I have it in a separate tab up right now. I always have my Twitter up. My Facebook, by virtue of me doing a lot of podcasts, I sign off that a lot, and then I'll hop back on because I don't want things to be like chiming in my ear while I'm talking. But yeah, I mean, thankfully, by virtue of being a freelancer who works at home, who was in the journalism scene, like I spent all day on Twitter before this, but it is a lot more active. I can't just like lurk and read. Like I have to keep an eye out for hashtags, and I got to keep an eye out for like people talking about me, and I want to respond to people and make sure that they're feeling acknowledged. It is draining for sure, and I feel like I wish that I had the mental discipline to be able to sort of shift gears on a dime, as opposed to being sort of half in Twitter and Kickstarter all day. But yeah, I mean, I think especially early on in the campaign, you want to be on top of things, and this campaign may be new or maybe 5 days old for me, but I had somebody reach out to me today saying, "Oh, I just heard about this." And it's like, I've been posting, where have you been? I've been posting about it all week. And it just shows that you can still post about it all week, and it's not going to hit everybody in your Facebook feed. It's not going to hit everybody in your Twitter feed. Promoting as hard as you can. If somebody's going to get annoyed with you and like mute you or not back your campaign, they weren't going to back it in the first place. So don't bother worrying about that. Worry about leaving it all out in the field. You owe it to yourself, and you owe it to your collaborators to fight for every last backer until the clock runs out.
For sure. And it's funny you talked about Zach. I know he made a tweet about like, how do I make my tweets different, right? Because you feel like, oh my God, there's a little inch of guilt. At least for me, there was, where I'm like, oh my God, this is the fifth time I'm kind of posting the same thing because it's the same Kickstarter. How much can you say? And I love to tweet about that. It's like, just back up my Kickstarter at this point, because I mean, especially once you get to day 25, you're just like, oh my God, I'm posting this so much. Like, am I annoying anybody? But honestly, you're in such the right mind frame. Like, who cares? Yeah. I'm not annoying anybody. I'm trying to get my book out there.
I'm trying to get the book out. I mean, I talked with Tyler James actually about this just this week.
Another great Kickstarter.
And I was like, I don't want to be annoying, and I don't want people to like stop liking me. Like, and he was like, no, dude, they like you. They, more people are discovering your book every single day, and they like you, and they like the book, and you keep adding value to the book with these stretch goals and with it enhancing the book and with your digital add-ons. And, you owe it to yourself. He made me realize, Tyler's seen me at conventions, and conventions, I have no shame about just carnival barker selling all day, every day. The benchmark I set myself was that I needed to sell 20 copies of Spencer and Locke Volume 1 every single day, and 15 copies of the sequel and 15 copies of Chapel. I needed to do that every single day. And if I couldn't do that, it was not for lack of trying. But if I couldn't do that, then I probably wouldn't do that specific show again, because that would mean that we must not have had sufficient traffic to get the numbers that we've been able to get in every other show. And Tyler was saying, like, I've seen you sell. Like, you don't stop selling in the middle of the day just because you hit 20. And I was like, that's true. I don't. And he's like, why would you do that online? I was like, good point. This is a 30-day con instead of a 4-day con. Instead of losing my voice, sort of asking people if they like Calvin and Hobbes.
Too, at least for me, like I'll like just not eat lunch. I'll just go through it and be like, I'll just eat dinner. I'm just gonna sell.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the same thing I go through. I mean, I'm a little bad at networking at conventions for that reason, because I'm like, well, it's daylight hours and there are customers. Like, I want to sell. Yeah, I think it is a challenge, and you got to be creative in figuring out ways to sort of keep things going. At minimum, you want to be like hitting your social media at least twice a day, just sort of a morning post and an evening post, just to let people know you're out there. In theory, Kickstarter will also, be giving you some gentle promo, as the campaign continues. and beyond that, it's just finding new stones to look under. You know, I know that my next week is, you know, super packed. But after that, it's finding more things to do after that. You know, there are going to be more podcasts that I haven't talked to. There's going to be more news outlets that I haven't talked to. And just kind of figuring out, okay, like, you know, who's left that, you know, we can keep talking to. And also, you know, the thing I think a lot of people don't realize is, like, you talk to podcasts, like, we're live, obviously, but a lot of people are not. A lot of times you talk to somebody and it's coming out a week from now. And that's good. You want more podcasts to be coming out a week from now. You want stuff to be coming out all the way until that last week. And, you know, so I think just, if you're not getting any buzz, then you need to be finding people who will give you buzz and who you will talk to. And even if you're only talking with like 2 people, you know, if one person, you know, reads this and decides to back the Kickstarter, Ben, I'm hoping it's you. You know, that's enough. That was worth the time talking. I guess, let me just answer Ben's question. What do you base stories on? Are they often based on events from your life or something else? I don't know. I mean, you know, they say write what you know. I mean, it doesn't mean like, look, it's not like my parents beat me, you know, for me to write Spencer and Locke. But, you know, I think finding that emotional core that rings true to you is important. You know, I've always been prone to self-recrimination and looking back, and, you know, and that's something that really informed the book is, you know, you kind of look back at the scars of your past. So, you know, or going to the chapel, you know, have you ever had dysfunctional family before, or have you ever been in a relationship that you weren't sure was going to work out? Those are things that fuel the book. It's just finding something that's relatable. It can just be down to something of like, what's the thrill of learning how to drive a car for the first time? You know, that could be your story. What was it like during writing your first published book as far as mental stress and keeping things going after 5 issues? Like, where do you turn for your ideas? Well, to be fair, all of my books that have come out until now have all been 4 issues. So I don't have an answer for, like, you know, how do you do super long ongoings, but I've done sequels, you know. I always try to write with another idea in my back pocket. But what was it like during, as far as mental stress goes? It's fairly stressful. For me, it was less stressful of the writing because, like, I got locked in. I was just like, okay, this thing, I'm going to have to write this. Like, I just have no choice. I must write this book because I have artists depending on me and I have a publisher who's waiting on me. And so it's just going to get done. For me, the mental stress came when it came to time to promote it. And when the book came out, because then it's out of your hands, and you hope you've dotted your I's and you've crossed your T's, but you don't know. And you don't know how people are going to respond to it. And that is very stressful. And that feeling of, if you don't talk to 1 million people about your book, that nobody's going to buy it. That's tough on the mental stress. But at the same time, you just got to remember, like, you're doing this because you're writing a comic, and like, that's super cool. And that's like way better than digging ditches. So, you know, when you have that little bit of perspective, it gets a little easier. And also just knowing that it's finite, that, like, you're not going to be in Hell Week all the time. And if you're in Hell Week all the time, then you need to switch some things up in your life.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ben, especially for all the questions in the chat. And I think we're going to start to wind down here. And of course, check out the Kickstarter. I've been posting it in the chat. And obviously it's a great story, and on $1 counts. You know, I think a lot of people they're like, well, I don't know if I can afford the book. It's like, that's okay. If you just give $1, the higher the backer count goes, the algorithm runs it.
Yes, every dollar matters. And the thing is, we've tried to set this up that there are tiers for every budget level. Like I said, our $5 tier, you're getting 2 comics already. You're getting 44 pages of value just for the $5. If you go for $10, you're getting 88 pages of comics, plus you're getting my script. So we're trying to give you a lot of bang for your buck. You know, and all of our backers are going to, you know, we've got some digital stuff coming that's really exciting. We've got our digital comics extravaganza. So basically, if you back, if you throw in $5, you're actually not just getting Spencer and Locke #1 and Going to the Chapel #1. You're getting like a dozen other people's books. And that's something that we are going to be actually doing every single Kickstarter campaign moving forward, because we've gotten so much interest in this digital comics extravaganza that we want to spread the wealth, and we want to make sure that we have people coming in for the second Kickstarter, the third Kickstarter, and getting to learn from that and watching that library grow. So yeah, I every dollar matters, every backer counts, and we're working really hard to make sure that this is of value. That you get just as much bang for your buck as you would buying something in the direct market, and that that you feel like you've gotten your money's worth before you read the book, and then once you read the book, I feel very confident that you're going to be excited to see what goes next.
Well, thank you again, David, for coming on. Hopefully this will be the last. I'm sure you'll have another Kickstarter, and we'll definitely chat and talk more about Kickstarter after you've had one very successful Kickstarter, and I'm sure another one.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And see you guys. Bye.